Rob Reiner is highly regarded as a director of beloved movies like This is Spinal Tap, Stand By Me, Misery, and The Princess Bride. However, his contributions to cinema also extend to running his own production company, Castle Rock Entertainment. Reiner founded it with Martin Schaefer, Glenn Pandick, his producing partner Andrew Scheinman, and studio executive Alan Horn in 1987. The name came from the fictional setting of several Stephen King stories, including The Body, which was adapted into Stand By Me. Each of them divided different responsibilities amongst themselves, with Horn acting as the CEO. One of the companies who originally invested in Castle Rock was Coca-Cola. Around the time, they were heavily involved in the entertainment business. They also signed a partnership with Nelson Entertainment to help produce the films and a distribution deal with Columbia Pictures. The first film produced by Castle Rock was the little scene drama Winter People. However, they would immediately follow that up with the Reiner-directed romantic comedy When Harry Met Sally. It was a sleeper hit during the jam-packed summer of 1989 and remains a popular film. This was also the first of a number of films Billy Crystal made for Castle Rock, owing to his close friendship with Rob Reiner. Fittingly, Castle Rock would produce an adaptation of Lord of the Flies, the book that Stephen King took the name of his fictional town from. That film was not particularly well received, though, and disappointed at the box office. Among the studio's early successes were the King adaptation Misery, which earned Kathy Bates the Best Actress Oscar, and the western comedy City Slickers, starring Billy Crystal and an Oscar-winning performance by Jack Palance. One of Castle Rock's biggest hits was A Few Good Men, directed by Reiner, starring Tom Cruise, Jack Nicholson, and Demi Moore, and based on the play by Aaron Sorkin. The film's Best Picture nomination also marked Reiner's only ever Oscar recognition. One movie's Oscar prospects that did not come to fruition was Mr. Saturday Night, directed, co-written, produced by, and starring Billy Crystal. The film received mixed reviews and was a box office failure, although David Paymer did get nominated for Best Supporting Actor. Crystal would have to make do with hosting the ceremony. In addition to movies, Castle Rock also had a television production arm. However, it only produced one hit show. That was Seinfeld, which was a huge ratings hit for NBC, won multiple Emmys, and lasted for 9 seasons. I personally associate Castle Rock and its lighthouse logo the most with Seinfeld, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. The rest of that television series were cancelled after 1 or 2 seasons, though, and have largely faded into obscurity. Do you remember Homeroom, New Attitude, Great Scott, The Single Guy, and Boston Common? If you answer no, well, you're not the only one. Although Castle Rock was a producer on the animated series Mission Hill, which garnered a cult following thanks to its airings on Adult Swim. Back to movies, they scored a big hit with the political thriller In the Line of Fire, starring Clint Eastwood. At the end of 1993, Castle Rock was acquired by Turner Entertainment and looked to expand the number of films they produced, although a lot of them released under this new ownership did not do that great. Andrew Scheinman directed his only film with the baseball movie Little Big League. City Slickers 2 was not able to match the success of its predecessor, and North was a particularly embarrassing failure for Rob Reiner, now more remembered for Siskel and Ebert's scorching reviews than anything else. Castle Rock did produce the critically acclaimed prison drama The Shawshank Redemption, based on Stephen King's short story. It was not initially a success at the box office, but got more attention after it was nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars, and eventually became a big seller on home video and a consistent rating success on television, helping it become one of the most cherished films of the 90s. Castle Rock also picked up Richard Linklater's Romance Before Sunrise, which premiered at Sundance to ecstatic reviews and did quite nicely for a talky independent film, even leading to 2 sequels about a decade apart. Reiner's The American President did not make back its budget on its theatrical release, but was thankfully a critical bounce back for North. There was also the acclaimed Western Lone Star, and even though it was destroyed by critics, Striptease performed okay at the box office. Castle Rock also scored another successful Stephen King adaptation with Dolores Claiborne. Meanwhile, the studio produced Dracula Dead and Loving It, which was a critical and commercial flop, and the last movie Mel Brooks would direct. Around this time, Castle Rock bought a screenplay by 2 young actors, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, titled Good Will Hunting. The script was originally a thriller about the government attempting to recruit a mathematical genius. Reiner suggested that it would work better as a straight character-focused drama and to emphasize the relationship between Will and his therapist. Damon and Affleck agreed with his notes, but the script was then put into turnaround, with Miramax eventually producing the finished film. Had Good Will Hunting stuck around at Castle Rock, it's very likely the film would have starred the likes of Brad Pitt or Leonardo DiCaprio, and Damon and Affleck's careers would have been very different. One of the most ambitious films produced by the studio was Kenneth Branagh's 4-hour adaptation of William Shakespeare's Hamlet. Despite critical acclaim and 4 Oscar nominations, the film was not a box office success. Apparently, audiences did not want to see a 4-hour movie with dialogue entirely in the Bard's English. In 1996, Turner was sold to Time Warner, making Castle Rock a part of Warner Brothers and bringing Alan Horn into the fold, leading up to him becoming president of WB a few years later. WB initially tried to sell the company to someone else, but could not find a good deal for it. The number of Castle Rock employees was downsized, as well as how many films they produced. The distribution deal with Columbia Pictures eventually ended in 1998. Most of the pre-1994 films would wind up being owned by MGM, while Warner Brothers would take many of the other movies. Fittingly, a Stephen King adaptation, The Green Mile, would become the first major success for Castle Rock released by Warner Brothers. The movie did very well at the box office and was nominated for Best Picture. Entering the 2000s, the studio had a hand in the Christopher Guest comedy Best in Show and the Sandra Bullock vehicles Miss Congeniality and 2 Weeks' Notice. Unfortunately, Castle Rock produced a series of major disappointments during this period too. Frank Darabont's The Majestic, starring Jim Carrey, was seen as a possible awards contender when it opened around the Christmas season, but was not well received by critics and flopped at the box office. The science fiction comedy The Adventures of Pluto Nash, starring Eddie Murphy, became one of the biggest flops ever, making only $7 million worldwide on a $100 million budget. Despite Castle Rock's previous success with Stephen King stories, Dreamcatcher was not one of them, while the Ben Stiller, Jack Black comedy Envy was another failure for the company. Thanks to flops like these, Warner Brothers decided to let go of more employees and decrease the budget and amount of movies Castle Rock could make. Even when they produced hits like Music and Lyrics, Michael Clayton, and The Bucket List, that was not enough to change WB's perception of them. Despite remaining a part of Warner Brothers, the last Castle Rock film to be released by The Shield was 2010's Flip. The rest of the studio's output since then, most of which are movies directed by Rob Reiner, have been released by other distributors, and the only ones to get a significant amount of attention are Friends with Benefits and Before Midnight. The rest came and went from theaters largely unnoticed. Even with these setbacks, Rob Reiner still retained a level of confidence in his company. A few years ago, he announced plans to relaunch Castle Rock and try to bring it back to its former glory, and he has already lined up some interested investors. He has been preparing a sequel to This Is Spinal Tap, and Castle Rock also recently started production on a sequel to the acclaimed crime film Wind River. Even the television arm is being brought back, as it was recently announced that they would partner with John Cleese on a revival of Fawlty Towers. Castle Rock has certainly had a rocky history, one dealing with the usual mergers and acquisitions that can affect any production company, and not all the films were winners. Nonetheless, Rob Reiner, Andrew Scheinman, and the other major players still showed an eye for interesting scripts they hoped would impress audiences, whether directed by Reiner or other filmmakers, and I'm sure Stephen King especially appreciates how many times Castle Rock has turned his stories into great, lasting movies. See you next time.